The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning when the rain hammered Port Carroll's coast like bullets against glass. Jonah Greaves held the envelope between calloused fingers, studying the law firm's embossed letterhead while coffee grew cold on his workbench. 30 years of furniture restoration had taught him patience, but the formal language inside made his stomach twist. Mr. Greaves, your presence is required at the estate reading of Harold Westman, deceased. You are listed as secondary beneficiary in his final will and testament. However, we have received documentation from the primary beneficiary challenging your mental fitness to receive any inheritance. Primary beneficiary. Jonah read the name twice before it registered. Celia Greaves, his wife. The workshop felt smaller suddenly, sawdust motes dancing in pale light filtering through rain-streaked windows. Harold Westman had been a client years ago, an old widower who'd hired Jonah to restore a Victorian dining set. They'd barely spoken beyond pleasantries about wood grain and finish options. Why would Harold leave him anything? And why would Celia claim he was mentally unfit? Jonah set the letter down and picked up his phone. Celia's number went straight to voicemail. Her bright professional voice chirped about being busy with coastal events and promising to return calls promptly. She'd been working late frequently, planning some corporate cruise package for her company's biggest clients. The law office of Haynes and Associates occupied a converted Victorian house on Pine Street, its gingerbread trim painted funeral home gray. Aubrey Haynes met Jonah in a cluttered conference room that smelled of old books and lemon polish. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I'm sorry for the confusion, Mr. Greaves. Aubrey spread documents across the mahogany table. Mr. Westman's will is straightforward. He left his house and investments to your wife, but there's a provision for you to receive his workshop and tools if she predeceases him or becomes unable to inherit. But she's trying to block me from getting anything. That's where it gets complicated. Aubrey pulled out a manila folder. 3 months ago, your wife filed documentation claiming you suffer from severe depression and have been hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. She provided a power of attorney signed by you, giving her control over your legal and financial affairs. Jonah's hands went cold. I've never been hospitalized. I've never signed any power of attorney. Aubrey's expression grew grim. I was hoping you'd say that. She slid a photocopy across the table. Is this your signature? The document looked official. Letterhead from Mercy General Hospital, his name typed clearly, a signature that resembled his own scrawled at the bottom. But something was wrong with the J in Jonah, too rounded, too careful. This is forged. I believe you. The question is why your wife would forge psychiatric documents to prevent you from inheriting tools and a small workshop. Jonah studied the papers again. The amounts weren't large, maybe $30,000 in equipment, some antique hand tools, nothing worth destroying a marriage over, unless there was something else. What exactly did Harold leave to Celia? Aubrey hesitated. The house is worth about $400,000, but there's also a safety deposit box and investment accounts. I don't have the exact figures yet. How did he even know Celia? I only met him twice. According to his notes, she contacted him last year about estate planning services. Apparently, she mentioned being married to someone who'd done excellent work on his furniture. The timeline bothered Jonah. He'd restored Harold's dining room set 3 years ago. Why would the old man suddenly decide to leave everything to a woman he'd barely met? That evening, Jonah sat in his truck outside Coastal Events, watching Celia through the office windows. She moved with practiced efficiency, gesturing animatedly while talking on her phone. Her dark hair was pulled back in the sleek bun she favored for work, and she wore the navy blazer he'd bought her for Christmas. She looked like a stranger. When Celia finally emerged, she smiled and waved as if nothing had changed. Hey, honey. Sorry I'm late. The Henderson cruise is turning into a nightmare. She slid into the passenger seat, bringing the scent of expensive perfume and something else. A cologne he didn't recognize. How was your day? She asked, checking her reflection in the visor mirror. Interesting. Got a call from a lawyer about Harold Westman's estate? Celia's hand froze on the mirror. Harold who? The old man whose furniture I restored, remember? You said he reminded you of your grandfather. Oh, right, she snapped, the visor closed. What about his estate? He died. Left me some tools in his will. That's nice. Her voice was carefully neutral. Probably not worth much. Jonah studied her profile as they drove home. The lawyer said you filed papers claiming I was mentally unstable. Celia turned to face him, her expression shifting to concerned surprise. What? That's ridiculous. Why would I do that? That's what I'm wondering. There must be some mistake. I'll call them tomorrow and clear it up. But she didn't call. For 3 days, Jonah watched Celia maintain her routine. Early morning gym sessions, long days at the office, late evenings on her laptop claiming to work on client proposals. She moved through their house like someone preparing to leave, though she showed no signs of packing. On Friday, Jonah drove to Mercy General and requested copies of his medical records. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with graying hair, searched the computer system twice. I'm sorry, Mr. Greaves. We have no record of you ever being treated here. What about psychiatric evaluation or hospitalization? Nothing. Are you sure you have the right hospital? Jonah thanked her and sat in the parking lot, staring at the forged documents. Someone had created an elaborate lie about his mental health. Someone who knew his full name, address, and could forge his signature well enough to fool a casual observer. Someone who lived with him. The next morning, while Celia attended her usual Saturday yoga class, Jonah searched their shared home office. He'd always been careful about respecting her privacy, but the forged documents changed everything. Her desk drawers were locked, but the small file cabinet wasn't. Inside, he found folders labeled with familiar names: their mortgage company, insurance providers, credit card statements. But there were also documents he'd never seen before. A life insurance policy on him for $200,000, taken out 6 months ago, application forms for credit cards in his name that he'd never signed. And at the bottom of the stack, a folder marked H.W. Estate. The Harold Westman folder contained photocopies of the will, correspondence with Aubrey Haynes, and handwritten notes in Celia's careful script. One page made Jonah's blood run cold. Jay doesn't know about the money market accounts or the coin collection. Total estate value approximately $1.2 million. Need to establish mental incompetence before he can contest. M says the crew's timeline works perfectly. Who was M? Jonah photographed everything with his phone, then carefully returned the files to their original positions. His hands shook as he locked the cabinet. Celia wasn't just trying to steal an inheritance. She was systematically documenting his life like someone preparing for his death. That afternoon, he drove to Radio Shack and bought a small digital recorder. Back home, he spent an hour figuring out how to hide it inside the landline phone's base station. If Celia was planning something, he needed proof. He didn't have to wait long. Sunday evening, while Jonah was in the garage organizing tools, the house phone rang. He heard Celia answer, her voice bright and professional. But within minutes, her tone shifted to something he'd never heard before. Intimate. Conspiratorial. I know you're worried, but he doesn't suspect anything. He thinks it's just about some old tools. Pause. Miles, listen to me. The forged papers worked perfectly. Aubrey Haynes bought the whole story about him being unstable. Once the estate is settled, we can file for divorce citing his mental illness. I'll get everything. Jonah's screwdriver slipped, clattering against the concrete floor. Miles, the CFO at Coastal Events. The man Celia had mentioned casually over the past months. How smart he was. How he was revolutionizing their client management system. No, he won't fight it. Jonah's too passive. He'll probably be relieved someone else is making the decisions. Celia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Besides, by then you'll have transferred the business accounts like we discussed. He'll have nothing to fight with. Jonah crept closer to the kitchen door, pulse hammering in his ears. The cruise was perfect timing. 3 days together, no interruptions, and getting pregnant was, well, that wasn't planned. but it gives us leverage if he tries to contest the divorce. Pregnant. The word hit Jonah like a physical blow. Celia was pregnant with another man's child while planning to destroy him financially and legally. I have to go. He's in the garage, but he could come in any minute. I love you too. The phone clicked, and Jonah heard Celia's heels on the kitchen tile. He forced himself to continue organizing tools, fighting the urge to confront her immediately. Knowledge was power, and right now she had no idea he knew anything. When he finally went inside, Celia was curled on the couch with her laptop, supposedly working on cruise itineraries. How's the Henderson project coming? He asked casually. Good. Complex, but good. Miles has been really helpful with the financial logistics. Miles seems like a smart guy. He is. Very ambitious. She smiled without looking up from her screen. Actually, I might need to work late with him a few more nights this week. The client wants detailed budget projections. Jonah nodded and headed upstairs to shower. In the bathroom mirror, he studied his own face. 42 years old, graying at the temples, lines around his eyes from decades of detailed craftsmanship. He looked like exactly what he was, a skilled tradesman who'd spent his adult life building and fixing things. But Celia saw someone else, someone weak, someone disposable. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Monday morning, Jonah called Aubrey Haynes from his truck. I need to see you, today, and I need to know everything about Harold Westman's relationship with my wife. They met at a coffee shop near the harbor, away from Aubrey's office. She brought a thick folder and looked troubled. I did some digging after our conversation, she said, sliding papers across the small table. Harold contacted me about estate planning 13 months ago, but he didn't mention your wife initially. She approached him. What do you mean? Celia called Harold directly, said she'd heard he was looking for estate planning services. She offered to help him organize his affairs for free, as a favor to the man who'd been so kind to her husband. Jonah felt sick. She manipulated him. It appears so. Over several months, she convinced Harold to name her as primary beneficiary, supposedly to ensure you'd be taken care of if something happened to him. She told him you were struggling with depression and needed someone to manage financial decisions. And he believed her. Harold was 83, Mr. Greaves. His children live across the country, and he was lonely. Your wife is very persuasive, and she presented herself as a caring family member looking out for your interests. Aubrey pulled out more documents. But here's what's interesting. I reviewed Harold's medical records with his doctor's permission. Harold was diagnosed with early-stage dementia 8 months ago. Technically, that makes the will contestable. Meaning if we can prove Celia manipulated a man with diminished mental capacity, we can void the entire will and potentially pursue fraud charges. Jonah studied the medical records. What do I need to do? First, we document everything. The forged power of attorney, the false psychiatric claims, any evidence of her deception. Then we file a formal challenge to the will and request a full investigation. How long will that take? Months, possibly a year. But Mr. Greaves, there's something else you should know. Harold's estate is worth significantly more than your wife claimed. The house, investments, and collectibles total nearly $2 million. $2 million! Enough to disappear entirely, leaving Jonah with nothing but forged documents claiming he was mentally incompetent. That evening, Jonah confronted Celia carefully, testing what she knew. The lawyer called today about Harold's estate. Apparently there's some confusion about the will. Celia looked up from her dinner, fork paused halfway to her mouth. What kind of confusion? Something about Harold having dementia when he wrote it. They might need to investigate whether he was competent to leave such a large estate to someone he barely knew. Large estate? Celia's voice was carefully controlled. I thought it was just a house and some old tools. That's what I thought, too. But apparently Harold had significant investments. The lawyer mentioned something about $2 million. Celia set down her fork. $2 million? I know, right? Who would have thought an old furniture restorer could save that much money? Celia was quiet for the rest of dinner, but Jonah caught her making a phone call from the backyard later that evening. Through the window, he watched her pace the patio, gesticulating angrily. Whatever she was saying to Miles, she wasn't happy. The next morning, Jonah woke to find Celia already gone. She'd left a note saying she had early meetings and wouldn't be home until late. Her laptop was missing from the home office. Jonah called Aubrey. She knows about the money. I think she's panicking. Good. Panicked people make mistakes. But Mr. Greaves, I need to warn you about something. I ran a credit check on you yesterday. Someone has been opening accounts in your name for months. Credit cards, a second mortgage application, even a business loan. She's been stealing my identity. More than that, she's been building a financial profile that makes you look reckless and unstable. Combined with the forged psychiatric documents, she could potentially have you declared incompetent and gain control of all your assets. Jonah felt the walls closing in. What's my next move? We go on a fence. Meet me at my office in an hour, and bring any documentation you have about your business, property, and financial accounts. The next 3 hours were a whirlwind of paperwork. Aubrey helped Jonah establish a revocable trust with himself as sole trustee, effectively protecting his business and property from anyone claiming power of attorney. They filed formal complaints about identity theft and demanded investigations into the forged documents. Most importantly, they prepared a comprehensive challenge to Harold Westman's will. This should protect you legally, Aubrey said, sealing the documents in a large envelope. But Mr. Greaves, I have to ask, what are you planning to do about your marriage? Jonah looked out the window at Port Carroll's main street, watching people go about their normal lives. I'm going to give her exactly what she's been planning to give me, which is nothing. That afternoon, Jonah visited 3 banks and moved all joint accounts into his name only. Years of steady income as a furniture restorer and building inspector had given him good credit and strong relationships with local financial institutions. When he explained that someone had been forging his signature and opening fraudulent accounts, the bank managers were sympathetic and protective. By evening, every credit card and checking account Celia had access to was frozen or closed. She discovered the changes when her card was declined at the grocery store. Jonah was waiting in the living room when she stormed through the front door, grocery bags abandoned in the car. What did you do? She demanded, face flushed with anger. I protected myself from identity theft. Identity theft? What are you talking about? Jonah pulled out printed copies of the credit reports Aubrey had run. Someone has been opening accounts in my name for months, taking out loans, applying for credit cards, even trying to get a second mortgage on our house. Celia's eyes darted to the papers, then back to his face. That's impossible. You must have forgotten. I didn't forget anything, Celia. Just like I didn't forget signing a power of attorney or being hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. The color drained from her face. Jonah, I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. He stood up, and for the first time in their marriage, she took a step backward. You forged documents to make me look mentally unstable. You manipulated a dying old man into leaving you his estate. And you've been stealing my identity to build a case for having me declared incompetent. That's crazy. You're being paranoid. Am I? Then explain this. Jonah played the recording from Sunday night, Celia's voice filling the room with crystal clarity. Miles, listen to me. The forged papers worked perfectly. Aubrey Haynes bought the whole story about him being unstable. Once the estate is settled, we can file for divorce citing his mental illness. I'll get everything. Celia sat down heavily on the couch, her face gray. Jonah? Please let me explain. Explain what? That you're pregnant with another man's child? That you've been planning to destroy me financially and legally? That you convinced a lonely old man with dementia to leave you $2 million? $2 million? Her voice was barely a whisper. You didn't know the real amount, did you? You thought it was just the house and some tools? But Harold was worth a lot more than you realized. Celia looked up at him with something like fear in her eyes. What are you going to do? Jonah walked to the front door and opened it. I'm going to give you the same chance you were planning to give me. Nothing. You can't throw me out. This is my house, too. Actually, it's not. I bought this house 3 years before we married. It's been in my name only since the beginning. Check the deed if you don't believe me. Celia stared at him as if seeing a stranger. Who are you? I'm the man you thought was too weak to fight back. Jonah's voice was calm, matter of fact. You have 30 minutes to pack whatever you can carry. After that, I'm changing the locks. Jonah, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. No, we can't. He looked at his watch. 29 minutes. Celia ran upstairs and Jonah heard drawers slamming, closet doors banging. She was crying, but he felt nothing. The woman sobbing in his bedroom was a stranger who'd been planning his destruction for months. She came downstairs with 2 suitcases and her laptop bag. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. What about the baby? What about it? It's not mine. Celia reached for his arm, but he stepped away. Jonah, I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I love you. No, you don't. You love what you thought you could take from me. After she left, Jonah sat in the quiet house and called a locksmith. Then he opened a bottle of wine, a good Pinot Noir they'd been saving for their anniversary, and began planning his next moves. The first was a visit to Miles Beaumont. Coastal Events occupied a modern building overlooking the harbor, all glass and steel, designed to impress wealthy clients planning luxury vacations. Jonah had been there twice for company parties, smiling and making small talk while Miles held court, charming everyone with stories about exclusive resorts and private yacht charters. Now, standing in the building's lobby at 7 a.m., Jonah felt like a different person. The past week had stripped away something soft and trusting, leaving behind someone harder. Miles arrived at 7:30, dressed in an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He looked surprised to see Jonah waiting by the elevators. Jonah? What brings you here so early? We need to talk. Miles glanced around the empty lobby. Is everything okay? I look like a man who discovered his wife is cheating with her boss and planning to steal $2 million from a dead man's estate. Miles went very still. I think there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. I have recordings, Miles. I have documents. I know about the pregnancy, the forged papers, the plan to have me declared mentally incompetent. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Miles stepped inside, and Jonah followed. Jonah, let's be reasonable about this. Reasonable? Jonah pressed the button for the 5th floor. You've been sleeping with my wife, helping her commit fraud, and planning to steal everything I've worked for. What part of that is reasonable? Look, Celia and it just happened. We never meant for things to go this far, but they did go this far. The question is, what happens next? The elevator opened onto Coastal Events' reception area. Miles led Jonah past empty desks toward his corner office, clearly hoping to contain whatever confrontation was coming. Miles closed the office door and turned to face Jonah. What do you want? I want you to understand who you're dealing with. Jonah's voice was conversational, almost friendly. You see a quiet guy who fixes furniture and inspects buildings, someone weak, someone you can push around. But here's what you missed, Miles. I've been running my own business for 15 years. I deal with contractors, suppliers, building codes, and city officials every day. I know how to research, how to document, and how to build a case. Jonah pulled out his phone and scrolled to a video file. For instance, I know you've been using company resources to plan a new life with my wife. Company computer, company phone, even company credit cards for your hotel rooms. Miles's face went pale. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. Jonah turned the phone screen toward Miles. The video showed financial records, credit card statements, hotel receipts, phone logs. Celia kept very detailed records. She documented everything in case she needed leverage over you later. That's impossible. I was careful. She was more careful. Celia doesn't trust anyone, Miles. Not you, not me, not anybody. She's been building insurance policies against everyone in her life. Jonah pocketed his phone. The question is whether you want this information to stay private or become part of a public investigation into fraud and embezzlement. Miles sank into his desk chair. What do you want? I want you to disappear. Quit your job, leave town, and never contact Celia again. I can't just quit. I have contracts, obligations. You have bigger problems than employment contracts. The company's board of directors might be very interested to learn that their CFO has been embezzling funds and using corporate resources for personal affairs. It's not embezzlement. I was going to pay everything back with money from Harold Westman's estate. The estate Celia obtained through fraud and manipulation of a man with dementia? Miles stared at Jonah as if seeing him clearly for the first time. You're not the same person. No, I'm not. The old Jonah would have confronted you emotionally, maybe thrown a punch, probably ended up looking like the bad guy. This Jonah understands that the best revenge is public humiliation and financial ruin. Jonah walked to the office window and looked down at the harbor. You have 48 hours to resign and leave Port Carroll. If you're still here on Friday, I start making phone calls to the board of directors, the state fraud investigation unit, and a journalist I know who specializes in corporate corruption stories. Jonah, please. I made mistakes, but destroying my career won't bring back your marriage. My marriage was over the moment you and Celia started planning to steal from me. But you're right. Destroying your career won't bring it back. It'll just make me feel better. Miles tried once more. What about the baby? Don't you care about an innocent child? Jonah turned back from the window. That child isn't innocent. It's evidence of betrayal. And it's not my responsibility. He walked to the office door, then paused. Oh, and Miles, Celia's going to try to convince you to fight this, to stay and help her salvage the estate fraud. Don't listen to her. She's been lying to you, just like she lied to me. Whatever she promised you, she never intended to keep those promises. Jonah left Miles sitting behind his expensive desk, staring at financial documents that suddenly looked like evidence in a criminal case. 2 days later, Coastal Events announced that Miles Beaumont had resigned to pursue other opportunities. Celia called Jonah 14 times that day. He didn't answer. The real confrontation came on Saturday morning. Jonah was in his workshop, sanding a Victorian dresser, when Celia appeared in the doorway. She looked different, hollow-eyed, wearing old jeans and a wrinkled sweater instead of her usual polished outfits. Miles left town, she said without preamble. Jonah continued sanding. I heard, you destroyed him. He destroyed himself. I just documented it. Celia stepped into the workshop, looking around at the tools and wood shavings like someone visiting a foreign country. This has to stop, Jonah. We need to talk like adults. We tried that Tuesday night. You lied about everything. I made mistakes. You committed fraud. Jonah set down his sandpaper and looked at her directly. You manipulated a dying man with dementia. You forged legal documents. You stole my identity. Those aren't mistakes, Celia. They're felonies. She sat on a work stool, suddenly looking exhausted. What do you want from me? I want you to sign a confession admitting you forged the power of attorney and the psychiatric evaluation documents. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I'm going to make sure everyone in Port Carroll knows exactly what you did. Your friends at the gym, your coworkers, your book club, your yoga instructor. Everyone? Celia laughed bitterly. You think I care about gossip? I think you care about your reputation more than anything else. It's why you've been so careful to make me look unstable while you maintained your image as the perfect supportive wife. Jonah pulled out a folder. But I've been documenting too, Celia. I have photographs of every forged document, recordings of your conversations with Miles, evidence of the identity theft, and witness statements from Harold Westman's doctor about his dementia. He spread the papers across his workbench. I also have something else. A statement from your gynecologist confirming your pregnancy and the approximate conception date. Funny thing, you conceived during that company cruise, 3 days when I was home working on the Henderson House renovation. Celia stared at the medical records. How did you get those? You left the appointment card on your dresser. I called and explained that I was your husband, trying to coordinate insurance coverage for prenatal care. Amazing how helpful medical offices can be when they think they're talking to a caring spouse. That's illegal. Medical privacy, like forging psychiatric evaluations, is legal? Like stealing someone's identity is legal? Celia was quiet for a long moment, studying her hands. What happens if I sign your confession? You give up any claim to Harold Westman's estate, you admit the documents were forged, and you leave me alone. What about the baby? What about it? It's still your stepchild. Legally, not after the divorce, it isn't. And Celia, there's going to be a divorce. The only question is whether it happens quietly or becomes a public spectacle. She looked around the workshop again, at the careful organization, the quality tools, the half-finished furniture projects. I never understood this place. All this making things with your hands. No, you never did. You saw someone you could use, and when I stopped being useful, you decided to throw me away. That's not true. Then explain the life insurance policy you took out on me 6 months ago. $200,000. Explain the credit cards you opened in my name. Explain the forged psychiatric documents designed to make me look unstable enough to commit suicide. Celia went very still. I never planned for you to hurt yourself. Maybe not consciously, but you created a paper trail that would make my death look like the inevitable result of mental illness. Very convenient for a widow trying to claim life insurance and estate inheritances. You're being paranoid. Am I? Then why did you research the quickest way to have someone declared dead when they disappear? I found that in your browser history, Celia, right next to searches for how long before missing person presumed dead and life insurance payout missing spouse. The color drained from her face. I was researching options. You were planning my disappearance, maybe not my murder, but certainly my destruction. And when I was gone, either dead, institutionalized, or simply broken, you and Miles would have had everything. Jonah picked up a fountain pen from his workbench and held it out to her. Sign the confession, Celia. It's the last gift I'm going to give you. What gift? The chance to disappear quietly before I decide to press criminal charges. She took the pen with shaking hands. Where do I sign? 3 weeks later, Jonah sat in Aubrey Haynes' office as she reviewed the final estate documents. Harold Westman's will has been declared invalid due to his diminished mental capacity at the time of signing, she announced. Since he died without a valid will, his estate goes to his closest living relatives, a daughter in Seattle and a son in Denver. What about the house and workshop he left me? That provision was part of the invalid will. But here's something interesting. Harold's family wants to sell everything quickly. They've offered to sell you the workshop and tools for $30,000, well below market value. Jonah nodded. I'll take it. There's more. Celia's confession about the forged documents has been forwarded to the district attorney's office. They're deciding whether to pursue criminal charges. And Miles disappeared completely. Coastal Events filed a complaint with the police about missing company funds, but he's apparently left the state. Aubrey leaned back in her chair. Mr. Greaves, I have to ask, how does it feel? How does what feel? Getting justice. Winning. Jonah considered the question. He thought about Celia, staying at a motel outside town, working at a diner while waiting tables and trying to manage pregnancy alone. He thought about Miles, running from debts and criminal charges, his career destroyed. He thought about Harold Westman, manipulated and deceived in his final months by someone he trusted. It doesn't feel like winning, he said finally. It feels like survival. But that evening, as Jonah opened Harold's workshop for the first time as its legal owner, he felt something else. The old man had kept immaculate tools, organized with the precision of someone who understood that good work required proper equipment. Hand planes arranged by size, chisels sharp and clean, workbenches worn smooth by decades of use. Harold had been a craftsman like Jonah, someone who built things instead of tearing them down. Jonah ran his hand along the main workbench, feeling the smooth depression worn by countless projects. On the wall hung a small sign in Harold's careful handwriting. Measure twice, cut once. Good advice for woodworking, better advice for life. As he locked up the workshop and walked back to his truck, Jonah noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Celia sat behind the wheel, watching him. When their eyes met, she started the engine and drove away without a word. Some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired. No amount of skill or patience could restore them to their original form. The best you could do was salvage the useful parts and start over with better materials. Jonah drove home through Port Carroll's quiet streets, past the harbor where luxury yachts bobbed at anchor, past the Victorian houses where wealthy retirees lived comfortable lives built on careful planning and accumulated wisdom. The town looked the same as always, but he saw it differently now. Not as a place where people got away with deception, but as a community where truth eventually surfaced, like oil rising to the top of water. At home, he poured himself a glass of wine and sat in his living room, looking at the space where Celia's belongings used to be. The house felt larger, cleaner, more honest. Tomorrow he would begin the process of rebuilding his business, his reputation, his life. But tonight, he simply sat in the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Outside, rain began to fall on Port Carroll's coast, washing the streets clean for whatever came next.